The cold came first, quiet and unannounced, settling into the men as they stood in the yard, their breath rising in thin, uneven strands that vanished almost as soon as they appeared, as if even the air refused to hold on to them for long. No one spoke. There had already been too many words that morning, too many orders passed through layers of language until they became something blunt and uncertain, something that carried more confusion than meaning. The ground beneath their boots was damp, not frozen yet, but close, and each small shift of weight made a soft, hollow sound that seemed louder than it should have been. It was the kind of silence that did not feel empty, but watchful, waiting. One of the younger men glanced over his shoulder again, toward the fence they had just passed, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to understand what had been missed. The gate was still open. No guard stood there, no voice called them back. It remained simply open. "Did you see?" he murmured, barely moving his lips. The man beside him did not turn. "Yes," he said. A pause. "I don't understand it." Neither of them did. None of them did. The older man stood a few places ahead, his posture slightly bent, his hands resting loosely at his sides, as though conserving energy was no longer a choice, but a habit that had settled into his bones. He had seen more than most, or at least that was what the others believed, though he rarely spoke of it. Now he simply watched the American soldier standing off to the side, his stance relaxed, almost indifferent, as if this moment required nothing from him at all. No rifle raised, no urgency, just presence. It was that lack of tension that felt most unnatural. The line shifted forward, not because they were ordered to, but because standing still under that open sky felt somehow more dangerous than moving. Boots lifted, hesitated, then fell again, each step carrying them farther from the structure that had defined their days and closer to something that had no clear shape yet. The air smelled different here, not the stale, contained smell they had grown used to, but something broader, something alive. Damp earth, faint traces of wood smoke drifting from somewhere unseen. It filled the lungs too easily, almost sharply, and one man coughed under his breath, as if his body had forgotten how to take in something so clean. "It's strange," another whispered. No one asked what he meant. It was all strange. The road stretched ahead in a narrow line, cutting through fields that seemed too open, too exposed, as though there were nowhere to hide if something went wrong. That thought lingered for a moment, then faded, because nothing was going wrong. That was the problem. The soldier gestured once, a small motion of the hand. Forward. No barked command, no threat behind it, just a direction, given as if it might be followed or not. They followed. Not quickly, not confidently, but they followed. The younger man found himself watching the soldier more than the path ahead, waiting for some shift, some tightening of posture, some signal that would explain the situation. It never came. The man simply walked alongside them for a while, then gradually slowed, as if his role in the moment had already ended. At some point, no one noticed exactly when, he was no longer there. The absence settled slowly, like the cold had. One moment unnoticed, the next undeniable. "He's gone," someone said quietly. They stopped for a fraction of a second, not enough to break the movement entirely, but enough for the realization to pass through them. The older man did not turn around. "Keep walking," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried something firm beneath it. Not authority, something closer to understanding. They continued. The farm appeared gradually, not all at once, but in pieces. First, the outline of a barn, dark against the pale sky. Then the house, smaller than expected, with a thin line of smoke rising steadily from its chimney. Then the fence, low and uneven, more suggestion than barrier. There were no guards, no towers, no visible structure of control at all, just a place, ordinary, quiet, waiting. A man stepped out from beside the house, wiping his hands on a cloth as he walked. His movements were unhurried, almost casual, as if he had been expecting them but saw no reason to rush the moment. He looked at them, not with suspicion, not even with curiosity, but with a kind of measured attention, as though he were assessing something practical. Work, perhaps. The translator, a thin man with tired eyes, stepped slightly forward. He hesitated, as if unsure whether to speak yet, whether words were even necessary in a place like this. The farmer stopped a few paces away, his gaze moving from one face to another, lingering only briefly on each. Then he nodded once, more to himself than to them. "They'll do," he said. The words were simple, unremarkable, but when they were translated, they seemed to land differently, carrying a weight that was difficult to place. Not approval, not dismissal, something in between. The younger man shifted again, his voice low. "What does that mean?" The translator swallowed slightly. "It means we work. Work." The word felt familiar but distant, like something remembered from another life. It did not carry the sharp edge of command here. It did not come with punishment already attached. It simply existed. The farmer gestured toward the fields behind him, then toward the barn. "You can move around," he added, almost as an afterthought. The translator paused before repeating it, as if he needed a moment to believe it himself. "He says, we can move around." Silence followed. Not disbelief exactly, something quieter, more fragile. The younger man let out a breath that almost resembled a laugh, though it carried no humour. "Move where?" he asked. The translator looked at the farmer, who shrugged slightly. "Here," he said. "Anywhere here." The words, once passed along, did not settle easily. They hovered, uncertain, as if waiting to be challenged. The older man finally spoke, his voice soft but clear. "No guards?" The translator repeated the question. The farmer frowned, not in anger, but in mild confusion, as though the idea itself required effort to understand. "Why would I need guards?" he replied. The answer came back to them, unchanged, and something shifted in the space between them. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to be felt. The younger man looked toward the fence, then back at the open field. "This is wrong," he murmured. The older man shook his head slightly. "No," he said after a moment, "it is just different." Different. The word lingered. It did not explain anything, but it allowed the moment to exist without forcing it into something it was not. They were shown the tools next, simple things, shovels, rakes, worn handles smoothed by years of use. One of the men picked up a shovel, turning it slowly in his hands, as if expecting it to reveal something hidden. It did not. It was just a tool, the same as it had always been. And yet, holding it here felt unfamiliar. The farmer demonstrated a small motion, cutting into the soil with an ease that came from repetition rather than strength. He stepped back, nodding for them to try. No pressure, no urgency, just expectation. The first man stepped forward, his movements stiff, uncertain. He pressed the shovel into the ground, hesitated, then pushed down harder. The soil gave way with a soft, damp sound. He lifted it, turned it, let it fall. A small patch of earth disturbed, nothing more. He looked up, waiting. The farmer simply nodded once. That was all. No correction, no criticism, just acknowledgement. The man stepped back, his expression unreadable. The younger one moved next, more quickly, as if trying to prove something, though it was not clear to whom. His motions were rougher, less controlled, but the result was the same. Earth turned, soil exposed, work begun. The rhythm built slowly, uneven at first, then more steady, as the men adjusted not just to the task, but to the absence of force behind it. No one hurried them. No one watched too closely. The farmer moved off after a while, leaving them alone in the field, as if trust were not something to be earned, but something already given. That, more than anything, unsettled them. The younger man stopped for a moment, leaning on the shovel, his breath visible again in the cooling air. "He's not even here," he said. No one answered. They all knew. The older man continued working, his movements slower but more precise. "Then we work," he said quietly, "or we don't." The simplicity of it felt almost heavy. A choice, offered without condition, carries a different kind of weight. He paused, looking out across the field, toward the line of trees in the distance. "But we are still here," he added. The words settled into the ground between them, as real as the soil they were turning. The light began to shift, the pale sky softening toward evening, shadows stretching longer across the uneven rows they had made. The air cooled further, but the work had brought a different kind of warmth, subtle, internal. Not comfort, not yet, but something close enough to recognize. From the house, faint at first, then clearer, came the smell of food. It drifted across the field in slow, uneven waves, carried by the same cold air that had felt so empty before. One of the men inhaled deeply without meaning to, then froze slightly, as if the act itself had exposed something private. "Soup," he said under his breath. No one corrected him. It did not matter if he was right. The word itself carried enough meaning. The older man straightened slightly, his gaze shifting toward the house. "It has been a long time," he said. He did not specify what he meant. He did not need to. The younger man looked at him, then back at the field, then again toward the open space beyond the fence. "We could leave," he said suddenly. The words felt sharper than anything that had been spoken so far. They cut through the quiet, leaving a thin echo behind. The others stilled, not completely, but enough to feel the shift. The older man did not react immediately. He set the shovel down carefully, as if finishing a thought before beginning another. Then he looked at the younger man, not with judgment, but with something softer. "Yes," he said, a pause. "We could." The younger man waited, something tense in his expression, something uncertain. "But where would we go?" the older man added. The question did not demand an answer, it simply existed. The field stretched out around them, open, unguarded, leading into a world that no longer belonged to them in any clear way. The younger man looked down, his grip tightening slightly on the handle of the shovel. He did not speak again. The smell of food grew stronger as the light continued to fade, the sky deepening into a colder shade of blue. The work slowed, then stopped, not because they were told to, but because the day itself had reached its end. They stood there for a moment, tools in hand, unsure of what came next, as if the absence of instruction had become its own kind of uncertainty. Then, from the house, a voice called out. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to carry. The translator listened, then turned to the others. "We are to come inside," he said. No one moved immediately. Then, slowly, they began to walk, leaving the tools where they lay, stepping across the uneven ground they had worked, toward the house that waited with its quiet, steady light. Inside, the warmth did not rush them. It settled slowly, the way heat does in a room that has been lived in for years, seeping into the wood, the walls, the quiet spaces between things, until it felt less like something added and more like something that had always been there. They hesitated near the doorway, boots leaving faint traces of damp earth on the floor, unsure whether to step further or remain where they were, as if crossing that threshold required a permission no one had clearly given. The farmer moved past them without urgency, pulling out chairs with small, practiced motions, not looking at them directly, but not avoiding them either, just acting, as if their presence was already accounted for. The woman placed bowls on the table, one after another, the soft sound of ceramic against wood filling the silence in a way that felt almost deliberate. No one spoke until the translator cleared his throat quietly. "We are to eat," he said. It sounded strange, even as he said it, not because of the words, but because of how unnecessary they felt. The meaning was already there. The younger man sat first, slowly, his movements careful, almost restrained, as though sudden motion might break something fragile in the air. The others followed, one by one, the chairs scraping softly against the floor. The bowls were filled before they had fully settled, steam rising in thin spirals that caught the light. For a moment, no one reached for a spoon. They only looked. At the food, at the table, at each other. "Why?" the younger man asked again, quieter this time. The translator repeated it, though the word seemed smaller now, less demanding. The farmer's wife paused briefly, then shrugged, not dismissively, but simply, as if the answer did not require much thought. "Because you are here," she said. The words, once translated, landed softly, not as explanation, not as justification, just as fact. The older man lowered his gaze to the bowl in front of him, then picked up the spoon. The first movement broke the stillness. Others followed. The taste came slowly, cautiously at first, then with a growing certainty that it was real, that it would not be taken away, that no condition was attached. No one spoke after that. There was only the quiet rhythm of eating, the faint clink of spoons, the sound of breathing that had begun to steady. Outside, the cold pressed against the windows again, unchanged, patient. But inside, something had shifted. Not trust, not yet. Something smaller, something that did not ask to be named. When they stepped back out later, the air felt sharper, as if reminding them of where they still stood, but it no longer felt empty. The younger man glanced once toward the dark outline of the fields, then back at the house, its light steady behind him. "It's still open," he said. The older man nodded faintly. "Yes," he replied, and after a moment, almost to himself, "That is the strange part." The barn held the night in a different way, the cold softer there, dulled by wood and the faint lingering warmth of the day, though it never fully disappeared. They lay where they could, coats pulled close, the quiet stretching out around them, not oppressive, just present. No one spoke for a while. The younger man shifted, staring up into the dark beams above. "We could still go," he said, barely louder than a breath. The older man did not move. "Yes," he answered. A pause followed, longer this time. "But we stayed." That was all. No explanation, no argument, just a fact that seemed to settle heavier than the question. Outside, the wind moved faintly across the fields, brushing against the open space without resistance. Morning came slowly, pale light slipping through the cracks in the wood, touching the ground in thin lines. When they stepped out again, the frost had returned, delicate and temporary, vanishing under their boots. The tools were still where they had left them. Nothing had been taken, nothing had changed. The younger man picked up his shovel, turning it once before pressing it into the earth. The motion came easier now, not natural, but less foreign. He worked in silence for a while, then glanced toward the edge of the field. "No one is watching," he said. The older man continued his slow, steady rhythm. "No," he replied. Then, after a moment, "We are." The day passed without announcement, measured only by the slow lengthening of shadows and the quiet repetition of simple movements. No orders came, no voices rose. Even the farmer kept his distance, appearing only now and then, nodding once, as if confirming something unspoken. It unsettled them more than control ever had. The younger man paused again, wiping his hands against his coat. "It doesn't feel real," he said. The older man pressed the shovel into the soil, then lifted it carefully. "It is," he answered. A small pause. "That's why it feels that way." The wind carried the faint smell of food once more as evening approached, softer now, familiar. The younger man didn't look toward the fence this time. He kept working. That evening, they did not hesitate as long at the doorway, not because they were certain, but because the uncertainty had changed shape, softened at the edges. The light inside was the same, steady and unremarkable, the table already set, as if their arrival were no longer an event, but a routine. They entered quietly, boots slower this time, more deliberate, as though aware of the sound they made. The farmer nodded once when he saw them, nothing more. It was enough. They sat without being told. The movement felt less foreign now, though not yet natural. Just learned. The bowls were placed again, steam rising, carrying that same quiet promise of warmth. The younger man watched it for a moment before speaking. "It happens again," he said, almost to himself. The translator didn't repeat it. He didn't need to. The older man glanced at him, then at the table. "Yes," he said. "That is how you know it is not an accident." The words lingered, not comforting, but steady. They ate with less hesitation this time, the rhythm returning more quickly, the silence less fragile. It no longer felt like something that might break. Outside, the dark settled fully, pressing gently against the windows, but it stayed there. It did not enter. When they finished, no one rushed them out. No signal was given. They simply stood when they were ready and stepped back into the cold, carrying the warmth with them in a way that was harder to lose. The younger man paused just beyond the door, his eyes drifting once, briefly, toward the open stretch of land beyond the fence. Then he looked back at the house, its light still steady behind him. "We could still leave," he said, though there was no urgency in it now. The older man stepped past him, pulling his coat tighter. "Yes," he replied quietly. A small pause. "But we are not trying any more." The younger man did not answer. He simply followed. Morning came without resistance, pale and quiet, the kind of light that did not demand attention, but slowly revealed what was already there. The frost was thinner now, breaking apart under their steps as they moved back into the field, the ground softer, more willing. No one needed to be told what to do. The tools were lifted almost without thought, the rhythm returning as if it had been waiting just beneath the surface. It was not habit, not yet, but it was no longer unfamiliar. The younger man worked in silence for a while, his movements steadier, less abrupt, until something in him seemed to settle. He paused only once, straightening slightly, his eyes drifting toward the open stretch beyond the fence. It was the same view as before. Nothing had changed. And yet, it no longer pulled at him in the same way. "It's still there," he said quietly. The older man did not look up. "Yes," he answered. A pause, the sound of soil turning filling the space between them. "But it is not waiting for us." The younger man frowned slightly, as if trying to understand, then looked back down at the ground. He did not ask again. The work continued, slow and even, the kind that measures time without needing a clock. At some point the farmer approached, his steps easy, his presence no longer something that shifted the air. He watched for a moment, then gave a small nod, the same simple acknowledgement as before. No praise, no correction, just recognition. It was enough. The younger man noticed it this time. He did not react, but something in his posture changed, almost imperceptibly, as if the nod had confirmed something he had not realized he was waiting for. By the time the light began to fade again, the field looked different. Not transformed, not complete, but touched, shaped in small, uneven ways that spoke of effort rather than control. They stood for a moment at the edge of it, tools resting loosely in their hands, their breathing slower now, more even. No one suggested leaving, no one mentioned the road. When the call came from the house, softer than before, almost expected, they turned without hesitation. Inside, the warmth met them again, but this time it did not surprise them. It felt familiar. The bowls were placed, the steam rising, the same quiet ritual unfolding without variation. The younger man sat and looked at the table, then at his hands, then briefly at the others. "We are staying," he said, not as a question, not even as a decision, but as something already understood. The translator did not repeat it. The older man simply nodded once, his expression unchanged. "Yes," he said. A small pause followed, one that did not carry tension anymore. "For now," he added. The words did not weaken the statement. They gave it shape. Outside, the cold remained, patient as ever, pressing gently against the walls, the same as it had been on the first day. But inside, the warmth held steady, not stronger, not brighter, just constant. And somewhere in that quiet balance, between the open field and the closed room, between the choice to leave and the act of staying, something settled into place, not as an answer, but as an understanding that did not need one. Time moved differently after that, not faster, not slower, just less noticeable, as if the need to measure it had quietly fallen away. The days repeated in small, consistent patterns, work in the fields, the quiet return, the steady warmth of the house, each moment no longer surprising, but not empty either. The younger man stopped looking toward the fence altogether. It remained where it had always been, low, open, unchanged, but it no longer carried the same weight. One afternoon he paused only briefly, leaning on the shovel, his gaze drifting across the land without searching for anything beyond it. "I don't think about leaving any more," he said, the words simple, almost neutral. The older man continued his slow rhythm, pressing the blade into the soil with the same careful motion. "No," he replied. A pause. "You think about something else." The younger man frowned slightly, considering that, then gave a faint nod, as if recognizing something he could not quite name. The farmer passed nearby, offering that same quiet acknowledgement, a small nod that had never asked for anything in return. This time, the younger man returned it, almost without thinking. The gesture was brief, barely noticeable, but it lingered in a way words never had. By evening, the light softened again, the sky lowering into that familiar calm, and they walked back without waiting to be called. Inside, nothing had changed, and that was what made it different. The table, the bowls, the warmth, it all remained steady, untouched by doubt or hesitation. They sat, ate, and for the first time the silence felt complete, not fragile, not uncertain, but whole. Later, outside, the air carried that same quiet cold, but it no longer pressed in the same way. The younger man stood for a moment before turning toward the barn, his voice low. "It was never the fence," he said. The older man glanced at him, then toward the open field, the dark stretching far beyond it. "No," he answered, "it wasn't." The cold returned again, as it always did, settling over the fields in the early morning with the same quiet certainty, tracing the ground in pale lines that would vanish by midday, leaving no mark of where they had been. The men stepped into it without hesitation now, their breath rising in steady rhythm, their movements already aligned with the work that waited. Nothing had changed. The fence still stood low at the edge of the land. The gate still hung open, unmoved, unguarded, as it had been from the beginning. It had never closed. That was what remained, not as a detail, but as a presence. The younger man passed it once that morning, closer than before, his steps slowing slightly as he moved alongside it, his gaze resting on the space beyond. The road was still there, stretching out in the same quiet direction, leading somewhere distant, somewhere undefined. For a brief moment he stopped, not out of doubt, not out of longing, just to look. The older man noticed, though he did not interrupt. He continued walking, then paused a few steps ahead, waiting without turning. The younger man exhaled softly, the sound barely visible in the cold air, and then stepped forward again, leaving the gate behind him without a second glance. "You didn't think about it," the older man said after a moment. The younger man shook his head faintly. "No," he replied. A pause followed, light, almost unnoticeable. "I saw it," he added. but it didn't ask anything. The older man nodded once, as if that was enough. They moved back into the field, the soil softer now, the motions familiar, the rhythm uninterrupted. Around them the land remained open, unchanged, offering no resistance, no direction, no demand. It simply existed, the same as before. The farmer appeared briefly in the distance, watching, then giving that same small nod before turning away again, his role in their days as quiet as everything else. By the time the light shifted and the cold began to lift, the work had already settled into them, no longer something done, but something lived through without effort. When the call came from the house, they did not pause, they did not question, they walked. Inside, the warmth waited, unchanged, steady as ever, the table set, the bowls filled, the same simple gesture repeated without variation, without meaning to impress or persuade. It no longer felt unusual, it no longer needed to. The younger man sat, his hands resting briefly against the table before reaching for the spoon, his movements calm, certain. Across from him, the older man watched for a moment, then lowered his gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in his expression, something softer than before. "It becomes quiet," the younger man said after a while, his voice low, not searching for agreement. The older man nodded. "Yes," he replied, "that is how you know it has stayed." The words settled into the space between them, not heavy, not light, just present. Outside, beyond the walls, the open gate remained where it had always been, unchanged, unnoticed, carrying no weight except the one it had once held. And in time, even that faded, until it was no longer a question, no longer a possibility, but simply a part of the landscape, like the trees, like the road, like the cold itself. Because in the end, it was never the fence that had kept them where they were. It was the moment they stopped needing to leave.